Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our next edition of our Google webinar series with Canada Helps. We will be starting in roughly 1 minute, so around 2:02 p.m. Just to give a few other people a bit more time to log on. I know this was a topic that a lot of people had interest in, so we will start right at 2:02. We'll talk to you then. Okay, I think we are good to get started. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another Canada Helps webinar in partnership with Google for Nonprofits. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by Alison Everhart and Ben Wise of the Google for Nonprofits team, and they will be talking to us about ad grants and specifically a little bit more about GA4. I know this is something that everybody on the call has heard a little bit about. We're going to dive deep into that today. But before we get started, there were a few things that we want to do on the Canada Help side. So first, we want to do a land acknowledgement. So our team at Canada Helps is grateful to have the opportunity to meet and work on the many Indigenous homelands across this land that we share in Canada. As settlers on these lands, it is important to acknowledge that our Vancouver offices are located on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people. The Montreal offices are located on the Kanien'kehá:ka Mohawk territory. And the land in which we operate in Toronto is a traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the First Nation, the Credit First Nation. We want to express our respect for the territories we reside in and honor the diverse Indigenous peoples who have lived and worked on this land historically and presently. We, the staff and leadership at Canada Helps, are committed to being active participants in reconciliation. We are committed to continuing to amplify Indigenous voices and learn how our work affects Indigenous people. Now, before we get started, we want to do a few housekeeping issues before we kind of dove in. So if you are having any trouble hearing us, there's a few things that you can try. First is to turn your computer volume all the way up. If that doesn't work, you can click on the sound check under audio in your GoToWebinar panel and select the speaker tab and then turn the volume on the speaker all the way to the far right to the max volume, and you should be able to hear us there. And for the best webinar experience, we ask that you close all other applications. Not only will this help you with just kind of really digesting all the information, but it will help make sure that the platform performs at its optimal levels. And before we get all the questions in the question tab, yes, you will be receiving links to the webinar slide and the recording to you all within 24 hours. You'll be able to watch this recording on demand so you can go back and reference all the great lessons here. And finally, you can hear us, but we can't hear you. So if you have any questions, type them into the questions log at any time. We will be able to see all those questions, and there'll be a time for us to kind of get those in front of our presenters near the end of the presentation as well. So anytime you have those questions, throw them in there and we'll be monitoring them on the back end. Okay, with that said, I will pass it over to Ben.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Phil. And a big thanks to Phil and the whole team at Canada Helps. This is I can't remember if it's our 6th or 7th webinar in partnership. So I just want to thank you again for the great partnership in helping us kind of spread the word on some of these offerings for nonprofits in Canada. Alison and I are both kind of longtime Googlers. We work in the ad sales teams in various different roles, but we both volunteer with the Google for Nonprofits. I'm very excited to be here with all of you today and walk through what we know is an extremely hot topic. So I'll just kick off with the agenda here. Fairly straightforward, but I will give an introduction on the Google for Nonprofits program, just to make sure that everyone has an understanding of what's available. And then I will pass it over to Alison, who's really the brains of today's webinar, who will walk you through everything you ever wanted to know about Google Analytics and how you can make use of it for your nonprofit. So to start off on the world of nonprofits within Google, we are very aware as a company of all of the amazing and important work that nonprofits are doing to change the world and support those in need and to spread good work within their communities. But at the same time, we know that being a nonprofit presents a very different set of challenges than a government entity or being a for-profit business. And those can include, and if you just jump to the next slide there, these types of challenges run the gamut from organizing and collaborating within your organization. Many of you will be volunteer run or work with a group of volunteers and managing that group of folks. How do you do kind of awareness raising and advertising and storytelling to get the word out of the great work that you're doing? And finally, many of you are funded by donations, and how do you continue to drive donations to ensure you can keep doing that great work? Let's jump to the next slide here. In 2011, so over a decade ago at this point, Google launched the Google for Nonprofits program. And the purpose or the mission of this program is really to help empower nonprofits to focus on your mission and on the people and causes that you are committed to helping. So basically, we try to give technology and tools and expertise to nonprofits to make your lives easier so that you can do the work that you have set out to do for your own mission, whatever that may be. Since we launched 12 years ago, it's a very global program. We operate across 67 countries. We have a big presence in Canada. Globally, this one always blows my mind, over 350,000 nonprofits across the world have signed up. So the scope of the program is extremely large, which is great and wonderful for us to know that so many nonprofits are getting value from our tools. And on the next slide, just a quick view of what's actually included in Google for Nonprofits. So the first one here is Workspace. So that's Gmail, Docs, Calendar, that kind of stuff, where nonprofits can get the Workspace for Nonprofits access at no charge. And if you are a Workspace business or enterprise customer, then you can get it for a discounted nonprofit rate. Ad grants, which is probably the most popular, biggest part of the program, essentially gives any registered charity $10,000 US a month to spend on Google search ads, which is an extremely effective way to drive donations and other things for your organization. And if this is new to you, please refer to some of the older webinars we've done. The last one we did about a month ago was entirely on like how to get on ad grants and how to get set up. There are also programs for YouTube as well as Google Earth and Google Maps. These are a little bit more niche, but we did want to let you know that they're available. What's not on this list, and the topic of today, is Google Analytics or GA4. The reason that's not on this list is because Google Analytics, as most of you probably know, is already a free tool. That said, we know that maybe the internal support that you have or the use cases that you have might be a little bit different than many of the for-profit users. And that's what we're going to go into in a little more detail today to make sure that you are all well equipped both to use it and for the transition to GA4 that is coming soon. So with that, I will go on mute and pass it over to Allison to walk through GA.
Hi, thanks Ben, thanks Philip, and hi everyone. Nice to see so many have joined the webinar. I think we're like up to 330 people, so that's absolutely amazing. Thanks for joining. This is my second year leading the Google Analytics webinar for nonprofits alongside Canada Helps, and I'm so honored to be here today to chat through the next 40-ish minutes on Google Analytics. But this year will be a little different though. You all at one point or another have probably heard the news about Google Analytics 4 or GA4 as I like to call it. Usually we talk through the older version of Google Analytics called Universal Analytics, but today we'll be going full steam ahead with Google Analytics 4. Universal Analytics will be sunsetting very soon for many of you, likely in July, depending on if you're on the free or premium version. And with that being said, I felt it made more sense to get you all familiar with GA4 instead. So yeah, let's just jump right into it. So I wanted to keep this a little interactive. So I did want to just get a temperature check on where everyone is at with GA4. As I mentioned, Universal Analytics will be going away very, very soon in the next couple of months. So I'd like to know in the poll, which I believe Philip's going to put up now, which of you are currently on Google Analytics 4 today? And I'll just give a moment for each of you to answer yes or no. Not able to see the poll, but if, oh, there we go. Apologies, you might see my screen there, but I believe the poll's still up for all of you. Are you also able to hear me? Oh, great. Okay, I see the results now. So it looks like we have about 32% of you currently on GA4. So less than half of you are on GA4 today. Good to know, and that's totally fine. Sorry guys, my screen keeps switching back and forth. One moment. That's what happens when you're live, right? Okay, one moment. Sorry guys. Keeps switching off on me, but yeah, look like half of you guys are not on GA4 yet, which is totally fine. That's why we're going to go through it today, hopefully get you all familiar. But I would say even if you're not on it, just one more question I would love to ask you all is, how well do you feel you know Google Analytics 4 today? So maybe you're not on it yet. It's all, most of you aren't, but would love to know if you've been reading up on it, maybe if you've been playing with the demo account, which I'll get into. Would love just to see your answers from 1 to 5, 5 being very confident. And we'll give that some time. All right, and Bill or Ben, I don't think I'm able to see the answer, but if you could share with me over audio what the answer was. Oh, there we go, I can see it now, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, looks like most of you not very confident at all, which again is totally fine. That's what we're here for today. We got a few, you know, 4s and 3s, but looks like 72% of you said you're not confident, which again is fine. That's what we're here today for. And there's lots of resources we're going to give at the end too that you can go through to help you feel even more confident about GA4. But thanks for participating. Just gives me a really good idea of where everyone's at. All right, so like I said, it's okay if you don't know GA4 and you may not feel comfortable with it. It is a totally new platform, or at least in the past couple or few years. But first, I just wanted to get you all familiar with the product itself and how we got here today to GA4. I'm not going to go into great detail on each. As you can see, GA has gone through several iterations and has greatly evolved over time. And it actually all began back in 2007. And if you think about the different eras of the online industry, 2007 was at its height of the internet age. Most of us by this time had a computer, maybe a laptop, we had high-speed internet, maybe just got out of dial-up, maybe even still using dial-up, but the GA product didn't evolve much after 2007. It wasn't until 2012, Universal Analytics, that a lot of us are likely using today, was introduced. So 2012, think about that. That was over 10 years ago. This is the GA product we're still using up until now, up until GA4 today, right? Think about how much the internet has changed since then. If I think back to 2012, it's the first year I actually got my first smartphone. This is another age of the online world, mobile phones, right? This has completely changed the way we thought about internet and websites. Apps are just starting to become a big thing. Instead of only watching YouTube on your desktop at home, you could be watching YouTube on your smartphone just right within reach of your pocket. And this is where you start to see Firebase launched a few years later. And Firebase is basically the Google Analytics for apps, and then integrated into the GA suite in 2017 as a separate platform, and then fully integrated into GA4 in 2018, which is also when GA4 was first launched, but it was just beta, and then it was publicly available in 2020. So if we look back on this timeline, it really has been a few years that GA4 has been available up until now. And the product teams at Google have been working hard to get it in parity with Universal Analytics up until last year. So at this point, it is a great time and pretty much a necessity at this point to get onto GA4 now. So seeing that less than half of you are not on GA4, I highly recommend looking at how you can accelerate getting into GA4, because they will actually stop processing data in July. And in fact, I mentioned earlier, Universal Analytics won't be available, like I said, in a couple months, but if you are on the premium version, the 360 version by any chance, you do have till July of next year. But I still recommend getting on GA4 as soon as you can. That way you have all the historical data and you get familiar with the product. So as mentioned, Universal Analytics was created back in 2012 in the early stages of the online era, right? First there was just the internet era, then there was mobile, and now the response to GA4 is, if you can guess it, you've probably been hearing it a lot, is the AI era. So we built GA4 with AI in mind, fully knowing with the restrictions of cookies you may have heard, restrictions of data policies and laws put in place for countries, for even entire continents like Europe, and even some of our own provinces within Canada, such as Quebec's Bill 64, protecting personal information being collected on the internet. So GA4 really needed to be able to handle data and make analysis with all these gaps of collection due to reasons I just mentioned. So GA4 really is the first Google Analytics product, GA4 product, to really use AI to the fullest extent. And I'll show some examples of that, and you'll see it throughout the reports when we go through a demo as well. So that brings us today. With Universal Analytics sunsetting very soon, we will actually solely be talking about GA4 today. So let's get you all equipped for the future, and hopefully in the next month or two if you're not already on it. And before I get into details, I wanted to share with you our 3 main goals and takeaways for you. So 1, we want you to understand how GA4 can help with your nonprofit's goals. And 2, GA4 being a completely new platform, it also comes with a user interface refresh, right? So it looks totally different new, and we'll show you how to navigate GA4 like a pro. And lastly, 3, we will go through key reports, metrics, and definitions to know as a nonprofit. And I'll go through a live demo as well through some of the reports that you should know as a nonprofit or charity organization. So by the time we've gone through all of this, we hope by the end of the session, you'll be able to confidently navigate around the new interface and understand reports and metrics that are most important to you and your organization. So let's just jump right into how GA4 can help with your nonprofit goals. So there are 3 main themes for how GA4 differs from Universal Analytics. The first is how data is collected, and this is probably the biggest one. So in Universal Analytics, the platform was all session-based, whereas GA4 is now event-based. What does that exactly mean, and why does that matter to you? So session-based tracking in Universal Analytics is a method of tracking user activity based on length of time a user spends on a website or an app. A session begins when a user first interacts with the website or app and ends the user has not interacted with the website or app for a certain amount of time. And by default, that's at 30 minutes. During a session, Google Analytics tracks the number of pages a user visits, the amount of time spent on each page, and a few other metrics as well. Now, when we talk about event-based tracking in GA4, it's a method of tracking user activity based on specific events that occur on your website or app. So events can be anything from a user clicking to a button to a user making a donation. But when an event occurs, Google Analytics collects data about the event, such as the type of event, the time of the event it occurred, and who the user was triggered for the event. So the main difference between session-based and event-based tracking is that session-based tracking is limited by time, while event-based tracking is not at all. This means that event-based tracking can capture more data about user activity, which can be helpful for understanding how users interact with a website or app, and essentially helping you understand the user journey itself. And you may be thinking, well, I could track events before in Universal Analytics, and you would be right. But what's really great about GA4 is that by default, it will already track page views, clicks, document downloads, such as PDFs maybe you have on your website about your organization. Maybe if you have YouTube videos on your website explaining your programs, it can actually track, who's watched it, if they paused it, how far into the video they went into it, can track scrolling. So there's a lot that just comes out of the box with GA4, where before you had to do all this manual tagging, either hard coding it or Google Tag Manager. But this, if you just get the one snippet of code onto your website, it'll automatically start to track a lot of these things already for you. Not everything, but it's a good majority and a good start and foundation to be on. Also on how data collection differs from the new GA4 is that it is more privacy focused and with user consent in mind. As I mentioned on the evolution of GA, there are more and more restrictions on collecting individual user data, and this is a direct response to that. By default, GA4 does not collect cookies, and there's more control of deletion of user data and opting out of tracking. If you've been to probably any website recently, or probably even maybe some of your own websites, there'll be a little pop-up now that's asking if it's okay to use cookies, and that's something that GA4 is actually looking at. So if you hit no, I don't want to be tracked, then GA4 will not track anything on you. And it'll just use AI and machine learning to be able to fill those gaps. And ultimately, GA4 is compliant with many of privacy laws out there and continuing as more comes out. So really, it's just a direct response to all the privacy-focused laws and policies that are coming out as well. Next, we're going to talk about the second theme on which GA4 and UA differ, and that is reporting. There are new reports such as engagement reports, new metrics such as lifetime value, and new ways to view your data such as the Analysis Hub for custom reporting, which looks similar to Data Studio or Looker Studio it's called now if you've used that before. And I won't get too much into the reports right now since we will go through some key reports to know as a nonprofit. And we'll go through the interface in just a bit. I'll do a live demo, but do know that the new way of reporting is made with AI and machine learning in mind. And finally, the third theme that we have on how GA4 differs from Universal Analytics is attribution. So first, GA4 uses a different attribution model by default. In Universal Analytics, the default attribution model is last click. And what that means is the credit was given for a conversion to the last channel that a user interacted with before converting, or let's say make a donation in this case. So in GA4, the default attribution model is called data-driven attribution. It's another AI feature that we have within GA4. So it's a lot smarter at making judgments based on where the credit should go based on data. And this means that the credit for a conversion is given to channels that are most likely to have influenced the user's decision to convert, and not just because of it was the last channel they arrived from. If you think about it, the user journey is very complicated. If someone makes a donation, they may have saw a video first, they may have gotten an email second, and then they decided to search for your organization and make it to the website. So there are usually multiple touch points that happen between first knowing about your organization to ultimately making a donation. So this is where the different customization and different attribution models can really help come into play that wasn't there before. And then second, GA4 allows you to use multiple attribution models. So in the older version, you could only use one attribution model at a time. In GA4, you can use multiple attribution models at the same time. So you don't have to necessarily pick one, you can switch back and forth. And you can see the difference, different types of modeling here. I would look more into these and see maybe which one works out best for your organization, but just know by default it does go with data driven, which does seem to be the gold standard, or at least to start out with. And third, GA4 allows you to create custom attribution models. In the older version, you could only use attribution models that were provided by Google. In GA4, you can create your own. And this allows you to create a model that is specific to your business if you see maybe one of these isn't working out, or maybe this isn't necessarily the way you look at attribution. But overall, attribution in GA4 is more flexible and it is more customizable than it was before. So really, to just kind of put that all together on looking at GA4, it's really designed for a future that is consented, uses first party, and ultimately is modeled, powered by AI. So when we say consented, we mean GA4 adapts to the privacy demands and control how data is collected and used based on user consent. And if you're curious to look more into this, like I said, there's a feature called consent mode. You can set that up in Google Tag Manager, and allows you to toggle on and off based on the answer that they gave you, if they're okay with you collecting cookies or not. And then also in the theme of first party, GA4 enables you to collect and use first party data to understand and engage your users. So that means you can collect data directly about your users, so you don't have to rely on cookies nearly as much, and collect information such as like email address, names, and purchase history as well. And then lastly, modeling enhances your first party data to fill in the gaps from cookie loss. So again, if they like say no, they don't want to be tracked, and measurement restrictions, just as like the Quebec bill we were just talking about. This means that you can measure user behavior even if they don't have cookies enabled. So really just filling in those gaps with AI and machine learning. So now that we understand the differences, which I think is really important to understand, how can we use the new version of GA4 to help your nonprofit? Well, there are several ways we can use GA4 to your advantage, but here are some high-level key points. So number one, maybe the most important thing you can get out of GA is use it to understand your audience. You can get insights into your audience's demographics, interests, and behavior, and this information can be used to create more targeted and effective marketing campaigns, but also just for your messaging and your ads and your creative. Really want to hone in and personalize to your audience, and really understand what is important to them. And then number two, to help measure your impact. So measure impact by tracking all these metrics that we get out of GA. So we get website traffic, donations. I'm sure most of you have some kind of newsletter, so tracking the signups for your newsletter. And this information can be used to help demonstrate the value of the work you're doing at your organization to donors, to volunteers, and other stakeholders within your nonprofit. And lastly, number three, make more informed decisions about how to allocate your resources, just like you would with the ad grants, right? And this helps provide insights into effectiveness of your marketing campaigns and impact on your programs. This can be used to make sure that your nonprofit is using its resources in the most effective way possible, which probably is the absolute number one most important thing to a nonprofit. So jumping into our second theme and going to get more into the actual platform itself is just simply how to navigate GA4. So as seen from the polls in chat, it seems like a lot of you are not on GA4 just yet. And if that is the case for you, it's no problem at all. I would just follow these steps on the screen here, and I'll leave it up. But I would just go to Google and type in GA4 demo account. It should be the first result you see there. Give a second. If you can pull up another window, it'll really help you see how GA4 is laid out. You can follow along with me later. Click into that support article, and then there should be something towards the top that says access demo accounts. You'll click through that and it'll take you down one more, and it'll say Google Analytics 4 property, Google Merchandise Store. And this is the account I will be using whenever I pull it up here. There are two options. There's a merchandise store and the flooded accounts. Both are GA4, so feel free to use other, but if you want to follow along with me, use the merchandise store one. And the flooded one is interesting if you want to look at it another time, because it does have apps in there as well. So you have website and app information. So if you do happen to have an app, or you're just curious, I highly recommend after the session going back and playing with either of these accounts and really just get familiar with the interface. And I'll just leave this up for 1 second, just in case anybody else wants to take the time to find this and pull up the demo account. It really is helpful. All right, so I'll go ahead and move on, but just know you can search for this and it should come right up for you. All right, so let's get right into navigating GA4. So if you want to go ahead and follow along and open up your account, I'm not going to do the demo just yet, but I will in probably about like 5 minutes. But first, I just wanted to chat what's so unique about GA4 properties themselves and the reporting and interface. So you will see that really there's a lot of different themes that go into GA4 and why they brought this whole new platform into light and a whole new version. I mentioned AI and privacy restrictions, data collection. And data collection is so different because we want to be agnostic across different types of devices. And that kind of goes nicely into this as well. So when I was talking about the two different GA4 accounts, there's the merchandise account and then there's the flooded account. So if you happen to have, say, an app, a website, you can actually aggregate all of that data into one property seamlessly. And really the back end of this, you don't need to know too much detail on this, but the back end of this was actually built off of Firebase, which if you remember at the beginning, I was saying is with mobile in mind. So it is a lot more agnostic on what platform you're looking at. So I talk about, website a lot, I talk about app, but it's supposed to be agnostic in the sense that even if you wanted to track, say if you had like an app on a gaming console on like Xbox or PlayStation, or if you had a CTV streaming app, or even if you had kiosks like in a store or at an event, those are actually also ways that you could use GA4. So we're trying to make it as agnostic of the platform itself as possible and just make it a pure tracking tool for you. And so that's what really makes GA4 unique from Universal Analytics. And I'm sure a lot of you probably mostly just have websites, or if any of you have any apps, but it's just good to know and understand the background of the multiple reasons why we moved on to this version. And another really big thing that you'll notice is the reporting infrastructure is pretty different. So they try to make it in a way that there's quick checks of your business metrics. So you'll notice a lot more different charts on the screen, different metrics on the screen, and kind of making it more like a widget experience, right? So now it's not just one big graph and one big table at the bottom. Really just want to get it so that it's quick and you can go in and you can see what you need to see. And if you need to dig deeper, that is available as well. But there's the overview ones, there's the more reports that kind of dig a little bit deeper, and you'll see what I mean in a bit. And then there is the analysis hub, which allows you to do more customizable reporting that maybe not be available directly in one of these predefined reports. So just a few features I wanted to go over is there is the search bar at the top, which I really highly recommend using it, especially if you're not familiar with the reports just yet in GA4. You can actually type in many different things in here. You can ask a specific question like, what was my bounce rate? If you type that in right now, it should come up with what it was in the past week or month or whatever you have your timeline as. Or you can just put in, you know, any kind of metric, or what were my top locations for donations. So there's a lot of different ways you can use that. Definitely play around with that at the top there. You also have your filter and segmentation comparison. This was in Universal Analytics before, but just wanted to point out where that's at. So you're still able to draw those comparisons and segmentation. So maybe if you want to see just people who are on mobile phones and compare that to all of your users on your website and see the different behaviors, you're able to do that by using that filter and segmentation at the top left there. And then where we really get into the core of GA4 and really the differences is all the automatically generated insights that you'll see across all your reporting. So you'll see here, for example, there's performance for week over week insights. You can click into it and it'll give you a little bit more info. We see on this example too, organic drove the most conversions last month. So maybe you want to know a little bit more about how people are getting to your website. And these are automated insights that come in just based on certain metrics going up and down. And then you can also click on the top right-hand corner where there's kind of like this squiggly up and down spike line, and that'll open up more insights for you. So here's a good example of how you can use the search bar at the top. So you can actually ask it questions, like I said. So top day of the week for revenue, so your donations, what was the top product? So in this case, this would be like, what was the top donation program? What was the country with top, you know, donations and so forth. So really play around with that. You might have to play with like the nomenclature. I know like a donation isn't technically like a purchase, but that is like the wording that the program does use. So just become familiar with that, but know that you'll have to have that set up as well. So you may need to look into what are called like e-commerce tagging, e-commerce reporting, and that'll be to help track your donations. And you likely did that in your older version of Universal Analytics as well. You'll just need to translate that into your tagging for GA4. There's also the thing at the top, I said, the little squiggly up and down line, that's going to be your insights. If you're not too sure what to ask in that top search bar, you can click onto this and it'll actually give you a bunch of examples of suggested questions you can ask. And it'll show you the answer, and we'll even give you like where you can go onto a report to find that answer. There's of course the real-time reports. This was also in the older version, but now we have real-time reports also spread out between different reports. So it's not just in the real-time section now, which is really nice to have. And then there's two main sections of GA4. There's going to be the life cycle reports, which are going to have to do more with the user journey itself. What are they doing on your website? How did they get to your website? What's the page that they landed on? What events are happening, conversions, and so forth. And that's broken down by the acquisition reports, engagement reports, monetization. So like that would be where your donation information would be once you have that set up, and then retention information as well. And then the other section is going to be user reports. So this has more to do with who are your users that are visiting your website, who are they? Where did they come from? What's their age? You know, what's their gender and so forth, just to really help you understand who your audience truly is. And what I highly recommend doing is going into your settings when you do get this all set up, when you get GA4 ready, is go into your admin settings, and there'll be a section for turning on what's called Google Signals, and that'll give you way more information such as interest reports on your users. So what are they interested in? Are they searching a lot about cats? Then maybe you'll see that in the interest reports, and you'll want to start doing more messaging towards you know, cat lovers or pet lovers, or you know, animal lovers, or maybe even a good way if you have you know, an organization or charity that is driven towards animals. So just really some great information there. Really highly recommend turning on that Google Signals option. That was in the older version as well. So if you had it turned on before, just make sure you definitely have it enabled for GA4 as well. And then lastly, we have the Analysis Hub. So if you've been in Data Studio, or what's now called Looker Studio, this may look kind of familiar to you. It is a similar tool, but this uses Google Analytics data directly within GA4, and it really just lets you be able to create custom reporting. So if there was something that wasn't in the predefined reports before, you're able to go into here and really create these great customizable reports. You can use all kinds of different visualizations. You can even use user journey paths. So I highly recommend going into here and just really familiarizing yourself with this, because this is really where you can become a power user of GA4. All right, so we're going to go into our last section here, which are the key reports, metrics, and definitions. So I'm going to first go over some quick definitions for you all that you're going to see sprinkled throughout the reports, and then I'm going to quickly go over some reports you should know as a nonprofit organization. So first, let's get into metrics we should know. So these are our quantitative measurements of data, right? So typically going to have some kind of number associated with it. And some of these you may be familiar with, and some of them may have changed their definition a little bit. Just based on how GA4 collects data. So the one you're probably going to see the most throughout is going to be sessions, and that's just simply the number of website or app visits that you have. Then you have your users. So this is similar to sessions, but if the same user comes multiple times to your website, they're only going to be counted once. And this is still the limitation of cookies though, so keep that in mind. Usually cookies expire after, you know, so many days, usually a week. If you're not really well versed into cookies, I highly recommend just looking into that and really understanding how that's going to affect your data. And then there's also bounce rate. I put it in here just because I know this was a term used quite a bit in Universal Analytics, but you won't quite see it just as much in GA4. It's still in there, but I don't think it's really surfaced as much. But that's the percentage of users who leave after only one page. So this is going to be people who didn't really interact with your website. So probably low quality traffic that came to your website. So you really want to have a low bounce rate. You actually don't want a high bounce rate. So think of kind of like golf rules, right? You want something low. But the reason why I say you won't see it as much anymore is because it is too website focused and not device agnostic, which is what GA4 is trying to go for. And what I mean by that, just think when you're on your phone, how do you define a session? If you go on an app and you leave just to go do something, check a text message real quick and then come back, do you count that as a session? Do you count it as a whole new session when they come back? It's really difficult, and it really was too focused on website behavior. So that's why you don't see it as much now. There's also conversion rate, which isn't anything new, but it's the percentage of users who took a desired action. So likely you'll talk about conversion rates for donations on your websites if you have that set up. And then something newer that you'll see is engagement time. So this is the amount of time users spent interacting with your website, meaning how long were they on your website and were they taking, you know, actions, those events that we have, were they scrolling, were they going from page to page? As long as they were being interactive on your website, this will be the engagement time that they spent on your site. And then we'll see engaged sessions versus just sessions. That might be a little confusing, so I put a little extra definition here, because session is just simply a website visit, right? Whereas engaged session is they had a visit, but they had an interaction of some sort. So kind of similar to bounce rate, but not necessarily on a rate level or percentage level. This is just going to show that you have high quality traffic and they're actually engaging with your website and that they're not just coming and leaving immediately. Next, we have our dimensions, which are the labels we use to describe just said metrics. So we have things like channels. You'll see this in your attribution and acquisition reports. So it's a way to categorize the sources of your traffic. So this could be like, did they come directly to your website and just type in, you know, xyz.com? Did they come in from a Google paid search ad? Did they come from an email and click through to your website? Really gives you a great view to understand how people are getting to your website. And then there's device, which is, you know, desktop, mobile, tablet, and so forth. Event, these are going to be the interactions. So like a click, and then you can do custom events as well, but keep in mind there's a bunch that already are defaulted in there. And then there's page. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but there's also landing page. So this is the first page that people visit. So this is important to look at because you want to make sure that users are landing on a page that really drives the message of your organization. If you think about it, it's like first impressions are the most important, right? And then lastly, conversion. I just put this note in here. There were goals in Universal Analytics. This is the same thing. We just now call them conversions because it seems to be more common nomenclature. But these would be the events that you use for optimizing and for advertising. So we are going to send these slides over to you afterwards, but I wanted to put together all the reports that I feel that would be most important to you as a nonprofit organization. So I kind of lumped them into certain themes. So learning about your user and your audience, acquisition, and then just content, and then finally talking more about the donations and kind of the more e-commerce reporting that you'll see in there. I put where the UA one is, the older version, and then where the GA4 one is, just because if you wanted to look back and see what the older report looked like versus what it does today, but get yourself familiar with the GA4 reports. So I'm going to just quickly do, just for like maybe 3-4 minutes, just show some of those here that we have. So let's start off with, you know, how are my website visitors overall? I think this is something we can probably all relate to. So if you want to follow along on the demo or in your own account, we would go to life cycle, engagement, and then overview. So I'm in the merchandise site. So if I go to life cycle, you might want to open this up, engagement, and then overview here. So we'll start to see some of those metrics that we had mentioned before, such as engagement time. So at least on the Google Merchandise Shop, we see that on average, people are spending about 1 minute and 50 seconds. So would be really curious to see what you have for your own website. Obviously, the higher the engagement time, the better, the more they're learning about your organization, the more likely they are to maybe share your organization, the more likely they are to donate to your organization, and so forth. Here's one of those real-time reports I was mentioning that are kind of embedded throughout. So we'll see in the last 30 minutes on the merchandise store, we had 132 users now. It's going up, guys. Maybe some of you are visiting it right now. That's also a really good call out too, is check out the Google Merchandise Store and look at the website versus what they are tracking in here, because it is really interesting to actually see what's being tracked. And then we have things, you know, like views. What are our top events that are happening on our website? So view promotion, that's probably, you know, some kind of promo that the merchandise store is running. Maybe they're running like 10% off on t-shirts or something. So a lot of people visiting that makes sense. People are interested in discounts. Let's see, what's another one? Scrolling. I mean, that makes sense. Most people are probably scrolling throughout. If you want to see more, you can click on the view events here. Then we have our actual pages here. So our top pages for the time period up here, by the way. So we'll have April 19th to May 16th as our time period. And that's what all these are going to be based on, unless it says, you know, in the last 30 minutes. Obviously, then that's going to be more real-time info. Everything else that doesn't say that, though, is going to be whatever time period you have at the top here, which looks like the last 28 days. We also have some other fun metrics, such as user activity over time. And then let's see, what else do we have here that might be interesting? Let's maybe get into something on the user side real quick, and then I'll hand it back over to Ben. But really use this. This is your cheat sheet right here. Everything you really need to know. Also, just go around and click around, have some fun, check things out. But I think if you have a specific question, come back to this and should be able to help you find the correct report. But let's take a look real quick at a user report here. So if we look into demographics, we can see, you know, users by country. I could even do new users if I wanted to, someone who hasn't been to my website before. We can check out what are the top cities people are visiting from. So the merchandise store, we have a lot of people from New York City. We got a lot of people from Toronto, which is where I'm in right now. We can see interest, so this is really cool. So it doesn't surprise me that a lot of people in the merchandise store are, you know, technology enthusiasts, you know, as we call it, technophiles. We have people who are animation fans, movie lovers, and so forth. So again, this is a really great report to really get to understand your audience. We can see that there is more males, presumably based on login information, more males visiting the merchandise store versus females. And then we also get like a language breakdown, which might be interesting if you're countrywide, to see maybe is there a lot of people visiting from the Quebec areas that have their browser settings onto French. Maybe you need to add more French onto your website to really, you know, hone in with the users from those areas and so forth. So I'm gonna end there because I want to make sure you give some time towards the end to go through all the great resources that we have. But I just highly recommend playing inside of here. I really hope that gave you at least a little bit of insight into why we moved into GA4, how the environment is today with tracking and all the restrictions on cookies and what we're doing with GA4 to really fill in those gaps through AI. So yeah, I'll end it there, and I really hope that was a good use of your time. And like I said, I will, oh, and I do have some additional reports in here. Just, it's everything we went through, but I just left them in here so that when we send it over, you can take a look at these and get just a little bit more detailed info on each of these. But yeah, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Ben.
All right. Thank you, Allison. For everyone on the line, I work full-time at Google, and my head hurts after listening to all that, given how much content it was. I learned a ton, and I work here, so I imagine everyone is probably feeling a bit overwhelmed, but don't worry, we will be sharing the recording and the deck afterwards. I do also want to take just a quick second now to give some ideas on where to get more support as you move forward. First one is there is a huge community for Google for Nonprofits. Mentioned earlier, 350,000 organizations in the program. So spend some time. If you have a question, there's a good chance that someone in that massive community has already had that question, already gone through it. So that is a great first place to try. Next up is the Google for Nonprofits YouTube channel. This has a ton of educational videos, and I think there's also a separate one specific to Google Analytics. So as you're digging into this topic in a bit more details, you can see just from the screenshot, there's some that are quick and easy that are 3 or 4 minutes. There's some that go into quite a lot of detail, 35, 40 minutes, closer to an hour. But another really great resource to help you kind of upscale on some of these new products and changes. And then our last slide here is just a bunch of other links that, again, you're going to get in the follow-up. So here's a website to sign up for ad grants for the Google channels. There's also a program. This is a little more focused on ad grants where you can sign up to get student volunteers to help you out. And then, in general, the first thing that we do as Googlers when we have a question is we check the help center, because there's 9 times out of 10 there's a really detailed article walking through anything. So that's usually your fastest and easiest way to go. And then there's other help support options through there. So as we said, this will get shared around, so you'll have all of these links. That is it for our formal content. I know Phil said there are a lot of questions. We've only got 2 or 3 minutes. I guess we can take 1 or 2 now, and then
Sure.
Allison and I can follow up. And maybe, Phil, you're able to share some of that documentation if we can write some things in as part of the follow-up afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, everybody, for asking all those questions. There are quite a few. So what I'll do after this, we'll get through a few of them here, but what I'll do is I'll actually put together like a Google Doc for the team. They can respond with their answers, because a lot of them are kind of technical. And then what we'll do is we'll share that doc with everybody in our follow-up as well. So I'll just go through the first few that we can, and then we'll see where we end up in time. Okay, so we have a few about the constant emails that people are getting to switch over to GA4. If they don't really know what they're doing and they simply ignore those warnings and emails, what are the consequences, like high level?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I honestly would really look into it and really try to go through that migration. I believe there's a simple click of a button available that'll just try to migrate as much of it as it can for you. Because as I mentioned, Universal Analytics, the version you're probably already using, is going to end in July. So it won't be collecting data anymore, like at all. So you'll still have access to the reports and the data, but only the historical data. So definitely get it up as soon as you can. I believe we tried to make it as easy as possible by making the migration like through a click. It's not going to be 100%, but it's still better than having nothing, and getting that historical data for GA4 as soon as you can is really, really important.
Awesome. Okay, next question here. I've been finding it challenging to configure conversions in GA4 from our various places where we process transactions. The support team at Google recommended that we hired a developer because they can't support non-Google products. So my question is, will nonprofits need to plan to hire dev assistants if we want to accurately configure and measure e-commerce conversion data?
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily can comment on exactly like where you should go to get help for this, but if you do happen to have someone savvy that can help you out with that, it does usually require a developer at early stages. And depending on what platform you're on, so like if you happen to be on Shopify or WordPress or one of those CMS, there's actually plugins that you can use with those CMS that'll automatically add in like some code for you, so it'll get tracking going. There's probably already some GA4 ones out there, so that wouldn't necessarily require a developer, but to get probably the best quality, I would recommend trying to work with some kind of developer, whether that's, you know, I don't know, like through an agency, or if there's just someone you can find contracting work for to at least just get like the foundational stuff set up. But again, if you're on a CMS, definitely look for plugins if you can.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so we are at time. I know that there are tons more questions, but like I said, we will document every single one of these questions. We have all of them here on our side, and we will get them all answered. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you so much to both Allison and Ben for once again giving us a really detailed and informative session, and we look forward to the next one. So thank you all for joining us, and we will see you during the next Google webinar. And look out for our email. There'll be a really big one coming. So we'll see you then.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining.